In addition to that, in the previous lecture, we also learned about the balance analysis, code balance and machine balance, and how those parameters are really important in really understanding and finally to optimize your codes. Okay, so the first thing we are going to start today is the pipeline functional unit. Okay, okay. So before we go to the pipeline functional units, let us first try to understand it from a very simple day-to-day life perspective. So first, you can just look into the right side, the text actually. So you should just focus on the right side now, and gradually we'll come to the left side. That is this diagram. So let's just assume a very simple situation that there are n students. So these are n students who want to take food in a queue in line. So important data is that there are n students, okay, and the complete food. Let's say the students want to take lunch. So this complete food contains 5 items or 5 dishes, and this has to be taken one after the other. So one student will come, he or she will take one by one all the 5 dishes, and when he or she completes, then that process is completed. So that's like completion of one task for one student. So taking the complete food. Second important point is all students take same food. So that means all students need to take all the 5 items. Third important point is the serving or the taking each item is a task. So the taking the complete food is like a big task, and then taking each of these sub items, each of these dishes is like a small sub task. So all these has to be completed to completely complete the food taking process. So total 5 steps required because you have 5 dishes. Now workers who are serving food are highly skilled and specialized for a single dish. So suppose someone is giving you bread, so he is very specialized in giving bread. So someone is giving you curry, he is very specialized in just giving curry. So the workers who are serving food are highly skilled and specialized for a particular task or a particular subtask. Each worker executes same work. So each worker executes the same task in whatever he or she is skilled, but works on different objects. So in this case, objects are basically serving same food to different students. So one by one student is coming, and that worker is giving that particular food to all the students one by one. Now, it has been tuned in such a way that all tasks or all tapes take around same time, one cycle. So a student taking a particular dish from a particular skilled worker just takes one cycle. So what is basically happening is that forwarding the partially finished work to the next. So each worker forwards a half finished or partially finished work to the next worker. So that's the context of pipeline. So we'll gradually translate this idea to computer architecture. Now let's understand here. So this is a 5 stage pipeline. Okay, so there are like 5 food items: item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, and item 5. And I have end students who has to be served, and this is the timeline in cycle. So this is like cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, and so on. So what happens exactly at cycle 1? So start when the time starts. So this is the starting point of time. So at cycle 1, the student 1 takes item 1 at that particular time. So at that particular instance of time, no other student can do anything because it has to be in order. So at second instance of time, second cycle, the student 1 now takes item 2, and exactly at that point the student 2 actually now takes item 1. At third instance of time, now student 1 goes to item 3, second student comes to item 2, and the third student comes to item 1. So similarly at 4, this will become student 4, then student 3, student 2, and student 1. And at fifth, exactly at fifth cycle. So this is my fifth cycle: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is how this will look like. Okay. Now exactly at this point. So that is at fifth cycle. This point. So this is fifth cycle.
Sir,
The first student.
excuse me, sir.
Yes.
सर आपका वॉइस पहले आ रहा है और ये वीडियो बाद में लोड हो रहा है।
Okay, okay. Just a minute. Just a minute. Hello, is it better now?
If you write and speak at the same time, then only I will come to know that video is loading.
Okay, okay, fine. Okay, so now, exactly at cycle 5, so fifth cycle. So exactly at fifth cycle, the first student completes taking the food. And now, what is interesting is that up, after the fifth cycle, at each cycle, one student completes the food taking process actually. So at sixth cycle, student 2 will complete. At seventh cycle, student 3 will complete, and so on. And finally, the student in nth student will complete the job. Now it is better. It is in sync.
Uh, still little lagging looks. It
Okay, but
looks like
overall it's okay, right?
Sir, better than the
overall
first
it's
one.
okay. Better
Okay,
than
fine.
the earlier.
Yeah. Okay, okay. If there is a major issue, you can let me know. Okay. Now, so this part is clear to all of you, right? This context.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what are the important things to be noted here is that there is a wind up time. So 4 cycles here. So only after 4 cycles have been spent, you will get the first result. Okay. So that's the called the wind up period, or so in this case, it is 4 cycles here. Now, how do we quantitatively measure it? So that is like the depth of the pipeline minus 1. So total number of stages in this pipeline was 5. So this is wind up cycle is 5 minus 1. So that is typically the wind up period. So after you have covered this wind up period, you start getting one instruction or one operation or one student completing the food taking activity just after this wind up period is over. Now every cycle one student will get complete the food taking process. So S1, S2, S3, and so on. Okay. Now similarly, there is a wind down process on here after the job is over. So here you can see this particularly this worker who was giving item 1, he or she does not have something to do after so he will be the first one to finish giving the food actually, and gradually all will finish. Okay. Now now let us translate this idea to the computer architecture. What is basically happening? So food, in this case, the complete food basically consisted of 5 dishes, 5 items. So now you can relate this food to some operation like an addition or multiplication. So what we basically do, we actually divide this complex operation, which can be addition or multiplication or something else, into simple subtasks. So that's the first idea. Second idea is that items or dishes in this case, which are like subtasks to complete operations. So these items are like subtasks. The third is less steps, which are like stages of pipeline. So here you can see everything was done in five steps actually. So total 5 steps were involved: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is called the stages or pipeline, or we also call it the depth of the pipeline. So you can see this pipeline has a latency of 5 cycles, because only after 5 cycles you will get the first result. So this is a very important, that what is the latency or depth of the pipeline. So that depends on the number of subtasks involved in that particular operation. Now suppose you are doing n operation. So suppose your code has something like this: ai is equal to bi plus ci, where I is from 1 to n. So that is like n operation. So that is equivalent to n students in this case. So one by one everybody will be served. So simplest pipeline you can think of is like fetch, decode, execute. And even if these are like complex processes, they can even be divided into simpler sub tasks. So this overall idea is clear to all of you, this overall idea of pipeline. This part is clear to
Yes,
all of
sir.
you. Okay. Now the point is, what do we learn from here? What are the important learnings actually? So the first important learning is that a core. So basically, the we are talking about the pipeline of the functional units. Okay, so the core can work on several independent instructions simultaneously. So the first idea of parallelism comes from here actually. So if you look into this picture very carefully, you can see. So this is the I mean this is the complete functional unit, the five stage pipeline. Now let's say if I just focus on this step 5, you can see that you are working on 5 students simultaneously. So S5, S4, S3, S2, S1. So at a given instant of time. So the 5th cycle, you are working on completely 5 independent instructions actually, or independent students actually. If we look into from that perspective. So this is a very important idea that core can work on several independent instructions simultaneously. So there is a simultaneous parallel work going on. 5 additions at the same time after the wind up phase. So what is actually happening is like the 5 additions are actually being done in the background after the wind up phase is over. Once the wind up phase is over, so once the one instruction gets finished at each cycle after the pipeline is full. So once you have made sure that your complete pipeline is full, so that becomes full after this fifth cycle. So then you can see you start getting one instruction every cycle, and that's very important. That you start getting because of this parallelism in the background, you start getting one instruction every cycle, and you are basically operating on 5 independent additions in the background. And this is almost widely used in all modern processors today. So that is one of the major contributing factor to performance. Now suppose I want to generalize this idea to really understand the effect of this pipeline. So let us generalize this idea. Let's say that I have a pipeline of depth m. Okay, so there are 5 stages in that pipeline, and let's say total independent operations which we want to execute is n. Okay, so what will be the total time to finish in cycle? Suppose you have a pipeline. So suppose you have a pipeline. I'm just writing it here. Suppose you have a pipeline. You have this pipeline in your architecture. So what will be the total time to finish this n operations?
M plus n minus 1.
Exactly, m plus n minus 1, m plus n minus 1. So that we can see from this picture here actually. So you can see here that n you will anyway take. So this n, and then you are taking 4 cycles extra. So 4 is nothing but 5 minus 1. So that is like m minus 1. So you will take n cycles plus m minus 1. So that is what you are going to take if you have a pipeline. Now suppose you have a unit which does not have a pipeline. Okay, which does not have a pipeline, and it takes m cycles to generate a single result. So how much it will take for n results?
N into M.
N into n. Perfect. So it will take m into n. Now let's look into the effect of this. I mean, how much speed up we are getting from this because of the pipeline. So that speed up is like what we can do is like we can put actually the time for this case. So time for without pipeline. So let me write the time without pipeline. So this is coming here. Okay, and in the denominator I am keeping this t pipeline here. So t pipeline is m plus n minus 1. Okay, now uh, if suppose, so generally your n will be much greater than m, because typically what will happen is like you will do much more operations compared to the depth of the pipeline. So how much will be that if n is much greater than m?
M.
M.
Yeah.
M. Right? If n is much greater than m, then I can simply I can neglect this m minus 1, and then I will get m actually. It will be of the order of n. So what is the conclusion? So the conclusion is, let me write down the conclusion. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is the depth of the pipeline decides the speed up. The depth of pipeline decides speed up. So that is the first important conclusion. Okay. Now, the second important thing is like we are generally we talk about throughput actually, because when we try to talk about performance, we are mostly interested in the throughput. Now, suppose I want to calculate the throughput of this pipeline. So, how should I calculate the throughput of this pipeline? So, what is the unit of throughput? Compute throughput.
Instructions per unit time.
Instructions per unit time. So here, how many instructions we are doing? N instructions. And how much time we are taking?
n plus n minus
m
1.
plus n minus 1.
Exactly, n plus m minus 1. N plus m minus 1. So let me just write it down properly. So that will become like, I can write it like, I can divide by n. So that will become 1 plus 1 plus m minus 1 divided by n. Okay. Now you look into this number actually. So generally, you know that n is typically large actually, for large n actually, for large n. So because generally n is large, so n is basically like you have a loop. So for I is equal to 1 to n, so that n I am talking about, this n. So typically n's are large. So if n is equal to large, so what will be the throughput?
1.
Exactly. So if n is large, throughput is equal to 1. So the throughput tends to 1. Now that's a very important message actually. We'll interpret that. Now let us look into a couple of important things like, so typically when you talk about that subtasks of a pipeline, so those subtasks are basically load, store, address, calculation, and there can be many more such subtasks. And the job of a compiler is typically to arrange the instructions in such a way as to make efficient use of all different pipelines. So there are different pipelines. There can be addition pipeline, there can be multiplication pipeline, there can be some other fetch, execute, decode pipeline. Okay, so the compiler takes care of that in the background for us. Now, let's try to understand it through a plot actually. Now, let's say that I want to look into the effect of throughput on the on this n actually, the problem size. So here n is actually problem size. So what will happen at small problem size and what will happen at large problem size? So let's first get those 2 points and then we'll look into the complete evolution of the curve. So what will happen when n is very large? What will be the throughput?
1.
1, exactly. If n is very large, so my throughput is somewhere here, and if n is very small, let's say 1 or 2, then what will happen to this throughput?
It will be 0 around.
Yeah, close to 0. So it will look like something like this. I mean, if you really plot this function, it will look something like this. Okay, now let's say that this is for let's say this is for m is equal to let's say 5. Now I want to draw the same diagram for another pipeline which has 10 stages. Let's say, so this is a diagram for a pipeline which has 5 stages. I want to draw a similar diagram for a pipeline which has 10 stages. So how will that curve look like? It will be below or above this curve?
Below.
Below.
Actually below. Okay, so let me draw it below. So I'm just taking your answer here. And finally it will go to
1.
finally it will go to 1. Okay. Okay, now let us do a very important conclusion, and let us draw the important conclusions from here. So let me finalize the conclusion. So the first conclusion we have already drawn. So that is like the depth of pipeline decides speed up. Okay, so that we know actually. Is there any other conclusion which I should draw after looking into this curve? Any other important conclusion?
throughput decided by data means size, data size.
If
Yeah, so
n
so the
was
the point is that we need large independent operations to achieve a throughput of 1, because you can get this value of 1 only when your n is large actually. So suppose if you have a very tight loop, okay, so suppose you have a tight loop. By tight loop I mean the n is small actually. N is small. That is what I mean by tight loop. So if that loop is tight, I mean very small, the value of n is small, then the pipeline will not work properly. So that's the pipeline bottleneck. Okay. So this part is clear to all of you. The idea of pipeline, how pipeline works, and how we really get the speed up from a pipeline, and how this parallelism is built inside. Even if we are not writing a parallel program, we get some kind of benefit out of this inbuilt parallelism which is present in the form of pipeline. This idea is clear to all of you?
Yes.
So, yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Now let us go ahead. Now let us again come back to the data part actually. So now till now what we have done, we have just looked into the execution unit. So we have discussed that we have something which and there is a pipeline in this execution and units. So that is what we discussed. So if you look into that, so pipelining of functional units. Okay, so that is present somewhere here. Okay. Now, this pipeline, which is a very sophisticated system, it will give you a very good performance only and only if you can provide it the required amount of data at the right point of time. So if there is a delay in giving the data to this sophisticated pipeline, it is not going to give you performance. So therefore, it's very important to really understand how the data flows actually before we can really utilize this pipeline properly. So typically what happens, now we can look into this picture that there are multiple memory, and therefore we call it memory hierarchies actually. So there are multiple memories. So you have a RAM, then you have L3 cache, then you have L2 cache, then you have L1 cache, which is the innermost cache. But in L1 cache is not unified. So you have a data cache L1D, and you also have instruction cache L1I. And we have already discussed in the previous lecture that if we go from memory towards the processor, so the bandwidth increase. So bandwidth is rate at which data can be transferred from memory to CPU. So as you travel from memory to L3 to L2 to L1 to register and finally to the execution units, you will have a better bandwidth. And this is the only way data can flow actually. There is no other way, and I mean it has to travel through this path. So data has to really go from memory to L3 to L2 to L1 to register, and then only these execution units can utilize the data. However, if you look into the latency story, then it is different actually. So as you go away from the processor, then your latency increases. So the memory has the highest latency. If I just look into this picture, and then L3 has a bigger latency compared to L2, and the latency of L1 is the least actually. So latency is actually time to transfer a 0 byte message from memory to CPU. So that is the minimum amount of time which you have to spend to send any data to the CPU. So that's the overall picture. So two important things: bandwidth, latency. Bandwidth increases as we go from memory to processor, latency decreases. I mean, so as we go from memory to the execution units. This part also we have looked into earlier, that DRAM gap is the increasing distance between the CPU and the memory in terms of latency and bandwidth. So this distance is increasing. Now, what has been really done to address this limitation of DRAM gap? So that is where the caches come into picture. So these caches basically alleviate the effects of DRAM gap. It really helps in reducing the effect of DRAM gap if we really write the code in that proper more I mean in a knowledgeable way. Okay, now let's understand the effect of cache. So typically what happens is, like, a CPU issues a read request. So this CPU is issuing a read request, and then the request to transfer the data from to the register, and then the first level catch logic checks whether this item already exists in cache or not. So whenever CPU requests for a data, the first thing which is done is like I mean, it is being checked whether that data resides in the cache or not. Now there are only two things which can happen. Either the data will reside in the cache. So if the data resides, if the data exists, then you will get a cache hit, or it might not exist in the cache. So the second, if the second possibility happens, like it does not exist in the cache, that is called cache miss. Now the problem with cache miss is that if you do not find the data in the L1 cache, then again you have to go to, I mean, L2 or L3 or maybe to the memory. So fetch from the outer cache, either from L2, L3, and the worst case from the memory. And we can see from this picture that latency actually increases as you go towards the memory. So here, if a cache hit happens, you will have a low latency, and here, if the cache miss happens, you will have a very high latency. Okay, and the problem is that the bigger the latency, this sophisticated execution units with sophisticated pipeline is actually waiting for the data. So if you cannot give the data, then they are not so useful actually. Now, how do we really use the cache to make sure that we get the best performance? Now, as far as instructions are concerned, so we have a separate L1 cache here, L1 instruction cache. So instruction cache miss are rare events actually compared to data cache miss. So typically, most of the time we face data cache miss problem. Okay, now there are only one solution. So that solution is either build a small and fast memory or a large and slow memory. So if you want to build a fast memory, then it has to be smaller so that it can sit on the processor. Or if you build a large memory, which is like a RAM, which can be in gigabytes, so that will be slow, but that cannot sit on the processor. So that's outside the processor, connected with the I mean this processor with some bus. So you can clearly see that we have two choices: either make fast and small, or you make slow and big. Okay, but we need to have both actually. So therefore, what we do, we have a principle of multiplicity. So I mean, introduce several levels of memory using the idea the larger the slower. So because there can be a huge requirement of data, so you need bigger memory. So but it will be slow. That's fine. And if you have already looked in your previous lab, that the typical values of caches actually ranges from kilobytes to megabytes. So do you remember what is the typical size of L1 data cache? How much is that?
32K.
Very good, 32K. And what is the L2 cache size?
128 maybe.
128?
And the last on L3 is 256
256 what?
KB.
So then you need to check these numbers. I mean, I'm not going to tell you.
I am not sure.
Yeah, so
Sure about L3
so I'm
cache.
just,
It was 256K, but not sure about L2.
Sir,
yeah, so you should look into it carefully. That
L2
Sir,
was
L2
256 and L3 was 6144.
6144 is how much? I mean, so always remember this number: 1024 is 1K. Okay, so that is like 2 to the power 10. This is in computer architecture very important number. 2 to the power 10, 1K. 2 to the power 20, 1M. Okay. So my suggestion to all of you is that this is a very important information which you have to keep in your head. Otherwise, you cannot optimize your codes. What is the size of L1 data cache? What is the size of L2 cache? And what is the size of L3 cache? And this changes from architecture to architecture. So typically caches are typically from kilobytes to megabytes. So you can confirm these numbers once again. Okay. Now this is a very important point which will come again. That data transfers occur in a block or bursts of single cache lines. So that is like when you are looking for data, suppose you are looking for 4 bytes of data, it will come in a packet actually. It will come in a block. You will get actually 64 bytes even if you are requesting for 4 bytes. And that's how the systems are designed. So that is where the concept of the catch lines comes into picture. We'll go there in more details. So this is the important idea that data transfers occur in the bursts of single catch lines, which are typically 64 bytes. So that is like if you are using 4 bytes, so that's like 8 items. Sorry, 16 items. So 4 bytes each. Now the goal is to avoid slow data pass. How we can avoid the slow data pass? So that is where the optimization comes into picture. Either the compiler will do some kind of optimization for us, or we really need to understand our code and write the code in such a way that we can avoid this slow data path. Okay, now let us just look into a very abstract model of this data transfer, basic model in terms of latency and bandwidth of different data paths. We have already seen there are different data paths: memory to L3, L3 to L2, L2 to L1, and so on. Let's say you need n bytes of data, and the latency of that particular data path is, let's say, TL. So this is in seconds. So that is like a wait time before the first byte of data actually goes from through that path. And let's say the bandwidth is B bytes per second. So each data path has some bandwidth. So let's say it is B bytes per second. So this number comes into picture only after the first data starts flowing actually. So initially you have to wait for a small time, which is latency, and then the bandwidth becomes important. Now, what will be the total transfer time for the message? So total transfer time for the message will be TL, which is the latency, plus how much data you want to get. So that is like n bytes I want to get, and at what rate I am getting. So that is like n divided by B. So both is actually in seconds. So this is the seconds. Now, what will be the effective bandwidth of data transfer? So that is the total data which you received, which is n bytes divided by total time, which is like TL plus n by B. So that's the effective bandwidth. So this model pretty much works for most of the scenarios actually, if you want to model data paths in terms of effective bandwidth. Okay, this part is clear to all of you up to this point? Up to this point, everything is clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Now, now let's look into the applications. So till now we are just looking into the architecture point of view. I mean, what is happening in the architecture. Now let's come back to the code actually, the algorithm. So each algorithm or each application has some access pattern. Like we already discussed in one of the very first lecture that there are 7 important dwarfs in computational science. Like you can have sparse linear algebra, you can have dense linear algebra, you can have Monte Carlo, structure, grid, etc. So or you can have something else like image processing, video processing. So each application has some access pattern, like how you are accessing the data from the memory. Each has a very unique pattern actually. Now in those patterns, so there are 2 important things which are present in that pattern. So let's first look into and that is called locality of reference. How you are in what pattern you are actually getting the data from the memory based on your application. So what happens, data items gets first into the cache, gets used again before getting evict. So that's where the this concept of temporal locality comes. Now look into it very carefully, because there are 2 kinds of locality. One is temporal locality and the second is spatial locality, which might have already studied. So but what is important here is that now we are talking about reuse in time. So when it is reuse in time, then it's temporal locality. So data items loaded into cache gets used again before getting evicted. So it's typical for iterative algorithms actually, that you have some data item which is already there in the cache. They again gets used before they're flushed from the cache. So that is when the temporal locality comes into picture. Now let's estimate the performance gain. So suppose you have some cache in your architecture. So what kind of performance gain it can give you? So let's say the cache is k times faster than the memory. So suppose your RAM is some bandwidth and latency, whatever bandwidth and latency is there in RAM. So now you have a cache which is k times faster compared to the RAM. Now this k comes from both actually. latency as well as bandwidth, which we have already seen. Now catch reuse ratio. So this is a fraction. So this is a ratio. So fraction of load or store that can be satisfied from catch because there was a recent load or store to the same address. Now this will be decided by your code actually. So on which application you are working. So suppose I am working on a particular application which has a catch reuse ratio of R. So that is like fraction of load or store that can be satisfied from catch because there was a recent load or store to the same address. So it is like suppose I was already using AI in my first instruction, and again I am using AI in the second instruction, or maybe after a couple of instructions again I am using AI for calculating something. So here what is happening is that in time actually, as your code is progressing in time, I mean maybe the AI still resides on the catch, and you are actually utilizing it before it gets thrown out. So this is where the concept of temporal locality comes into picture. Now let's say the access to the main memory is TM. Let's denote it by TM. So what will be the catch access time? What will be the catch access time in terms of TM?
K times TM.
So it will be slower, right?
Sorry, TM by K.
Yeah, TM by K. So it is given here that the catch is K times faster than memory. So if access time to main memory is TM, then catch will be slower. So TM divided by K. Now what will be the average access time for some R? So suppose you have a code where you know the R, what is the reuse ratio in your code. So what will be the typical average access time, T average?
R into TC plus 1 minus R into TM.
Yeah, R into TC. So the fraction, so where there is a reuse ratio, that fraction we are utilizing this TC amount of time, and where that reuse is not present because R is a fraction, so 1 minus R, so there will be using TM amount of time. Okay, now now if I have to look into the performance gain, so how much is the performance gain? Suppose there was no catch. Suppose there are no catch, everything has to be fetched from memory, then what will be the time taken?
TM.
TM, right? And if there is a catch, then what will be the time taken? And there is a reuse ratio of R, so what will be the time taken? This T average, right? Yeah. So I have to basically put the T average here, so which is like RTC plus 1 minus R TM. Okay. Yeah. So that's the T average actually. Now let's do one thing because you cannot cancel because you have a TC here and you have a TM here. So let's do one thing. Let's write everything in terms of TC. Yeah. So what is TM? So we know that TM is basically K into TC. So I'm going to write it K into TC. This is already in TC. So this is R into TC plus 1 minus R into KTC. Yeah. So how much you are getting? K divided by R plus 1 minus R K. So if I denote it using this performance gain by G, so let's call it G. So you can see that G is a function of both K and R. So what is K? K comes from the architecture because your catch is K times faster than the memory. And what is R? The R comes from your code actually. What is the reuse ratio in your code? So this picture is clear to all of you, how both the things are connected with each other, the performance gain.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now if reuse ratio is 1, let's talk about a scenario. Reuse ratio is close to 1. So that's like there is 100% reuse. So what will be the performance gain?
K by R.
K.
Just K.
K, exactly. Performance gain is K. performance gain is k. So now look into the picture very carefully. So programmer can design a code where he or she can improve the reuse ratio R. If you are really working with a very high reuse ratio that is close to 1, then you are going to extract a performance gain of k from your catch, because your catch is k times faster. So now we can really understand that what is the importance of this each level of memory. Like if they are really k times faster, then I have to really optimize my code in such a way that I can get that k times from the catch. Okay, now let's look into the performance gain. So this is gain actually, which is in terms of k and r, and let us plot it for different values of reuse ratio. So when reuse ratio is 0, what will be the gain?
1.
1.
Yeah, reuse ratio is 0, so it will start from somewhere here 1, and then as reuse ratio reuse ratio increases, then it will go up. Okay, let's say it goes up. Let's say this is my curve for k is equal to 5. Let's say I have a catch which is 5 times faster compared to the main memory, so I will get a curve like this. Now how will this curve look like if I have another memory which is 10 times faster than the main memory? It will be below or above,
It
above
will
or below this curve?
above.
Above this curve,
Starting,
exactly.
starting
Exactly, it
from
will start
1.
from here, but it will go high like this. So now we can see that I have two different memories. One is 5 times faster than the main memory. So here the gain is going like that. But if I can design another memory which is 10 times faster, or if I have another one which is say 100 times faster, so I'm going to get a very significant gain actually. Okay, so now this part is clear to all of you, right? That how performance comes from a catch and how it comes from the pipeline. This part is clear to all of you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now the question is, it does not solve all the problems. The problem is that there are many applications where the reuse ratio is very low. For example, image processing. See, in image processing, it's not an iterative. So you have an image and you are just going from one pixel to another. So when you have already worked on the first pixel, maybe you are not going to work on that pixel again. So there is no reuse as such in time actually. And there are many such algorithms where the reuse ratio is very, very low. So now whatever we have learned here, this makes sense only and only if your reuse ratio is high. Because if you have a low reuse ratio, you are not going to get any benefit. You are sitting here actually. And now we are talking about applications where the reuse ratio is really low. You cannot change the reuse ratio always. So now how that is addressed actually. So the point is, each new load is expensive. So every time you have to basically do a new load, because there is no reuse. Every time you have to do a new load, and each new load is expensive. So there is a huge latency, and that is where the concept of catch line comes into picture. So we just discussed about the concept of catch line, which is like, which is basically you don't get data. As a single unit, rather you get it in a bunch actually. So in a burst of in a burst. So this is an important point which I have already discussed. The data transfers occur in a block of a single catch line, which is typically 64 bytes. So now we can see that how that concept is basically utilized. Once again, I would like to highlight, many times students get confused that this is not catch reuse. Reuse is associated with temporal locality. Now we are talking about catch hit ratio actually, not catch reuse ratio. We are talking about how can we utilize the catch hit. Okay, so that is where the concept of spatial locality comes into picture. So what happens, the catch line is fetched as a whole from memory. That is, like, catch line is 64 bytes. Okay, so 64 bytes are fetched as a whole from memory. Therefore, latency penalty of a catch miss occurs only on the first miss. So suppose I have 16 items. Okay, let's say I have 16 such items, 1, 2, 2, and so on to 16. So I have to give that penalty of latency only for this item, because when I looked for this data item 1, I got everything. I got all the 16 bytes actually. I mean, I got all the 16 items, which is 64 bytes, because here each one is 4 bytes. Okay, and I know that my catch line will fetch 64 bytes for me, even if I request just for 1 byte, 1 item. Even if I'm requesting for 4 bytes, it will give me 64 bytes. So therefore, the latency penalty of a catch miss occurs only on the first miss. So here I am going to pay that penalty. For the rest of the 15 items, I'm not going to pay that penalty. Again, I have to give that penalty on the 17th item, because again I have to go to the memory to fetch this 17th item. Okay, this part is clear to all of you? This part
Yes,
is
sir.
clear to all of you? Yeah. So
Yes,
what is
sir.
happening? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about a simple array. Let's say AI is equal to let's
Excuse me,
say
sir.
I. Yes.
Sir, how is cache hit ratio different from cache reuse? Because every time we have a hit, we have a reuse of cache.
Yes, yes. So let us understand this very clearly. It's a very good point, and it's good that you have raised this issue once again. So the two things can happen. One is like I have this loop. Let's say let me put two loops actually. One is on time. Let's say I is going from or time is going from 1 to t(n), and then I have another loop which is like I is gone to 1 to 100, and then I am doing something AI is equal to bi plus ci, let's say. Okay, now for the time being, just forget about this loop. Let's say that this loop is not present. So in this case, what is happening? Is there a temporal locality here? Is there a reuse in this case? If this outer loop is not there, is there a reuse?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, no.
No, you are never going to use AI again. I mean, if you have already used A1, you are not going to use A1 again, right? This part is clear, right?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Yes.
Yeah. Now the moment I introduce the outer loop, which is running on time, now what is happening? How many times you are going to use A1? That depends on the value of Tn. Now let's say this is 10. How many times you are going to use A1?
10 times.
10 times, exactly. So
Ten.
this
10.
yeah, exactly. So this outer loop is actually the reuse in time, actually reuse. Okay, so you have to be very careful about this time. So this is where the reuse happens. Here the reuse not happening. It is just like you actually requested for A1 in the very first instant, and instead of just getting A1, you are getting A2, A3, A4 up to A60. So therefore there is a hit actually. This part is clear now to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's a very important understanding. Without this understanding, you cannot optimize your code. Sometimes compiler does it for us. I mean, that's a good thing, but if you really want to optimize your codes, without this understanding, you cannot actually. Very important. Once again, if someone has not understood, just let me know. I will explain it once again. Okay, so this is a very important thing to realize, that cache reuse is different and cache hit ratio is different. So hit ratio is coming basically from the spatial locality. So here what is happening, the neighboring items can be loaded from cache with much lower latency. So you asked for 1, but the 2, 3, 4, 5 just got loaded with much lower latency. You don't have to spend that significant latency for the rest of the 15 items. So whenever there is a spatial locality, particularly in image processing algorithms, this is very useful actually, because image processing will work pixel by pixel, or even in computational science problems, if we're working on say differential equations. I mean, it's very useful actually. I mean, it depends on the pattern of your stencil. You know what is a stencil, all of you?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll come there. So stencils are actually some kind of patterns which are present in your algorithm. We'll come there gradually. So it actually depends on the pattern of your stencil. Okay. So the point is, we have already understood temporal locality. Now we are understanding spatial locality. So whenever there is a spatial locality, latency problem can be reduced. Disadvantage, erratic data access pattern. So it's not necessary that always you will have a nice pattern like this, that after A1, A2, A3, A4, I mean, there can be erratic access pattern. You are accessing A1 and then you are accessing A50. So that time it is not going to help you, because it always loads the adjacent 15, 16, 15 elements. Okay, I mean, I'm just talking about single prison if each one is 4 bytes. Okay, now suppose catch line, just a small question to make sure that everyone is understanding. So suppose catch line length is 16. Spatial locality will fix the hit ratio at what? What will be the hit ratio for this?
15 by 16.
15 by 16, exactly. Out of 16, 16 times, you are hitting it 15 times. So that will be close to 0.94. So you can see the hit ratio is very high if the catch line length is 16 and you are really, I mean, utilizing this spatial locality. Okay, so the summary is that algorithm performance is governed by memory bandwidth and latency, and if an algorithm, if particularly most of the algorithms which we encounter, they are in fact memory bound in nature. Not always, but a good amount of algorithms are memory bound in nature. So that means the performance is governed by memory bandwidth and latency. And to really address that problem, we really need to understand this memory hierarchy. So that's the important conclusion which you are getting from this discussion. Okay, now let us do a simple problem to understand this idea of catch, hit and catch miss. I mean, what is the difference between these two, and what kind of performance gain we are talking about. So let's first understand the difference between hit and miss. So hit is like hit time, is time to deliver a line in the cache to processor. Okay, this also time to determine whether line is in the cache is also included in this. So hit time is like time to deliver a line in the cache to processor, so which is already in the cache. So there is a line which is already in the cache. So hit time is the time to deliver that to the processor if it is already in the cache. So this also includes the time to determine whether that line is in the cache or not. So that is called hit time. So typical hit times are 1 to 2 clock cycles for L1 cache. Okay, so this increases actually as you go to the outer cache. And what is miss? What is catch miss? So miss is a kind of a penalty. If you do not find it in the L1 cache, or if you do not find in the in cache, then you have to go to memory probably. Then typically that will take 10 to hundreds of cycles. So if you're going to RAM, then you have to spend almost like hundreds of cycles to just to get that data. So you can see the difference. If you have a catch hit, you just spend 1 to 2 clock cycles to get the data. If you have a catch miss, you're spending almost 100 cycles. I mean 100 times more time to get that data from the memory to the processor. Now let's look into these two scenarios. Like suppose you have a profiler which has been given to you, and then you just use that profiler on your code, and then you found that you got a 97% hit. And let's say someone else has also I mean developed the same code, someone else, and the same code is giving 99% hit. So and your code is, let's say, is giving 97% hit, same algorithm. Do we need to worry about this, or it's something we don't need to worry? Or let's say there are two situations, 99% versus let's say 80%. So let's say one code is giving 90, same algorithm I'm talking about. So one code is giving 99%, another is giving 80%, and in another case it is giving 99% and 97%. So in which scenario should you worry? Both the scenarios are only in one scenario. Any idea?
So 99 and 80,
80%
this scenario we worry about. Because 99 and 97 is already nearby.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's look into that. I mean, how wrong we can be actually. Now let's look into that actually. So it's typically like if you look into 99, 97, yeah, I mean, just I mean, if I simply look into these numbers, I will be very happy. Oh, I am already in 97. I mean, why should I worry for 2% heat actually? And 99 and 90, 80, you will see there is a big difference. So yes, we need to worry. So there is no doubt about that. Here we need to worry. But let's see about this case first, 99 versus 97. So as I've already discussed, catch hit time is typically 1 cycle. So if it is already in the catch, and catch miss penalty is 100 cycles. So I'm talking about main memory. So suppose it is not in the catch and you have to go to the main memory to get this data. Now, so let's talk about the average access time. Average access time for, let's say, 97% case first, 97% heat. Okay, I will say yeah. 97% heat. So how much will be I mean total, how much time I have to spend in terms of cycles in the case of 97% heat?
97 into 1 plus 3 into 100.
3.97
Exactly.
cycles.
Perfect. 97 divided by 100 into 1 cycle. All of you agree? And 3% miss, so that is 3 divided by 100 into 100. All of you agree, right? This calculation, all of you agree?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so 97% of the data I am getting from catch. So for catch, I have to give 1 cycle. So 97 divided by 100 into 1, and 3% data, because there is a 3% miss, I have to give a miss penalty, which is 3 divided by 100 into the miss penalty is 100 cycles. So 3 divided by 100 into 100. So that will give me close to 4 cycles. 4 cycles. Now let's do the same thing for 99%. 99% heat. Now how much will be this? 99 divided by 100 into 1 plus 1 divided by 100 into 100. So how much is that?
2 cycles.
Two
2
cycles.
cycles. 2 cycles. Now look into the difference. How much? What is the difference?
Double.
Double. 2 times. 2 times. So if this code is taking 1 hour, the another will take 2 hours. 2 times. It's times. It's not 2%. So you can see that the translation, 2% difference leading to 2 times. In time, it is 2 times actually. 2 times. It is 4 cycles. Here it is 2 cycles. So this is a huge difference actually. A huge performance gap just because of 2% of catch heat actually. All of you got this idea, right?
Yes.
Now let's look into 80% heat. So if it is 80%, then you can see 80 divided by 100 into 1, okay, plus 20 divided by 100 into 100, and then you can see it is like almost 20. I am just approximating, or 21. Let's write it 21. Okay, now we can see how poor that code will be. Even if you are getting 80% heat compared to a code which has been developed in much optimized way, I mean, which is giving you 99% heat, it will be 10 times slower. 10 times. All of you got this idea?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So the point is simple. I mean, how do you do this? So we have profilers. I mean, we don't have to spend too much time. I mean, there are sophisticated profilers which will give us this information about your code, how much heat is there, how much miss is there, and then you have to in fact, these profilers also tells you by highlighting where that that miss is happening actually. It highlights the code actually in some color, and then it tells you that this is the region where you are getting maximum amount of miss. And then you really need to learn the skills on how to remove this if possible. Always, sometimes it is not possible actually to remove this catch miss penalty, but many times if the programmer is very good and has a very good understanding of this, he or she may be able to bypass this penalty and improve the code performance. Okay, so I hope these are some of the important things which I've already discussed. Now let me summarize a couple of things before we go to the next topic. Okay, So one important thing is that all of you in your next lab should once again look into the data, I mean quantitative, how much is that? So L1, how much KB, L2, how much KB, and this you should actually look into MB. Okay, and then typically what is the access latency actually? That also you should look into. Access latency, I mean typically how many, let's say if it is, let's say I'm just giving some number, it is 4 cycles, so what is the access latency for this? Maybe it will be some 30 to 40 cycles probably. Okay, and then also you should look into the memory. I mean the memory I mean luckily we have a very big memory nowadays, it's in gigabytes. Okay, and then you should also look into the I mean the latency, which will be in few hundreds of cycles. Okay, and another important thing which you one should look into is like the typical block size. Okay, I mean catch line, actually I'm talking about the catch line. So typically it is 64 bytes. Okay, but this information you should retrieve from the architecture by yourself by using some commands which you have already discussed during the lab. Okay, now now the question is why we did all these discussions. The whole goal was to interpret this curve actually, which we got. So all of you could get this curve from your last assignment, or you are still trying to get this curve?
Sir, I have got, but it looks something different. It's not
Yeah,
exact.
it may look something different. Yeah, I mean, I mean, you have to look into the code, but overall the trend is similar.
Yes, it's going down.
Yeah, it's going
Yes,
down.
sir.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's going down. Okay, now it's time to interpret this curve actually. Before we finish this lecture, let us interpret this curve. So as I told earlier, that whenever you get this kind of plot in front of you where there is no single trend, the first thing to be done is like divide the whole plot into regions. So you have a x-axis. The first thing we have to do is like I first need to divide this whole plot into zones, like which gives different trends. So first zone is like this zone, where I can see the trend is different, which is going up actually. The second zone, if I smooth this, so then I am getting some kind of trend here. So that is like I probably this is my second zone. Then you can see something like this is another third zone. Then there is this something is happening here, and then this is a fifth zone actually. And I should try to give interpretations zone wise, otherwise it will be very difficult to give one interpretation for the whole curve. That's so that's another important advice, because you are going to get this kind of curves in this particular course. This is in some way this is also a data science kind of course actually. You are going to collect data from your codes and then try to interpret it based on your understanding of the hardware. Okay, now what will be a possible explanation for this part? Can someone tell me? Because ideally when the loop length is small, I should have ideally I should have started like this actually. I mean, why if the overall trend is like downwards, I mean I should have got a downward trend, something like this. I mean, why is low and then goes up? Okay, before we go there, let's once again revisit our code actually. So what we are doing here, I have three loops. So here I can see this there is a outer loop which is size, and this changes from minimum size to some maximum size in a power of 2. So this is this pink this violet color, this loop. So that is my loop length or problem size. So basically it is starting from somewhere 2 to the power 3, 2 to the power 3 and going to 2 to the power 29. So that's my maximum size. So that's the outer loop. Then what we do, depending on this size, whatever is the size at a particular instance of this loop, we define these three variables. I mean the arrays actually. So B, C, and D, and they have been all take the same value. So all the B's are 3, all the C's are 2, and all the D's are 1. Then what we do is like we define a variable called runs, which is actually total divided by size, and we have already finalized that total is always 2 to the power 29. So the point is, as size increases, the runs goes down, because the total is fixed, because this total is fixed. Okay, now if I have if the run is going from 0 to runs, okay, and for a given I mean size, so that loop is running here actually 0 to size actually. So accordingly, this will be calculated. So this is what the calculation is actually. So what we are doing is basically we are calculating A by using B, C, and D, which is stored here, B, C, and D. So first, let us talk about how much computation and how much data. So how much computations in terms of flops for one loop?
2, because one addition
Two.
and one
Yes,
multiplication.
two floating point operations, two flops. Okay, and how much data access?
4.
2 raised to power 29.
Four data access. So it depends on single precision or double precision. If you're doing it double precision, then you can get it into bytes, like 4 into 8. So basically 4 data items depending on which precision. So it tells us that if it is single precision, probably the scenario is better compared to double precision, because then you will require more data. Now, is it a compute bound or it's a memory bound code?
Memory bound code.
Yes, it's a memory bound kind of thing. I mean, so because you are getting 4 data items, I mean, you are trying to do 4 data access, and you are hardly just doing 2 floating point operations. Okay. Now let's try to interpret this plot actually. So why we are getting this trend for the first few points? Can someone tell me? So 2 to the power 5 is like how much? 2 to the these numbers always you
32.
should remember. 32, right? Yeah, 32. 2 to the power 10, always remember, this is very important. 1k, 2 to the power 21 m, and 2 to the power 30 is like 1 giga. So here you can see almost we are going to 1 gigabytes of data, because this is like the outer loop, that is 2 to the power 29. And then if you have 4 variables, so 4 into 8 bytes, so that's like 32. So 32 gigabytes actually you are using for this particular point actually. Sorry, it will be less than 32. That will be 16 actually, because we are not going to 2 to the power 30. So if it is 2 to the power 13, this point, so 2 to the power 13 into 4 variables, okay, each of 8 bytes. So 32 gigabytes. This part is clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So basically, in this particular example, 2 to the power 3 is like 8 into if you're using double precision, so that's like 32. So that's like 256. So we have started from 256 bytes problem. So here this point is like a 256 byte problem, and gradually we are traveling to almost like how much 16 GB. So that tells us the importance of this plot actually. So you are doing a simple code actually, which is traveling from almost a few bytes to gigabytes of data. Okay. Now the point is, how can we interpret this plot actually? So can someone tell me something about this?
Sir, it would be first a miss, so it is less. Then the throughput would
No,
increase.
no, 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 no. Because see, the point is, here you have 2 loops actually. You can see that way when your size is small, when your size is small, 2 to the power 5, so that is your size is small, right? Okay.
So it uses caches. So like first time it brings the whole bus, and then like 2 raised to 30 minus 2 raised to 27 times it uses the same memory. So the throughput is high.
No, throughput is not high. I mean, it should have started from here with that interpretation. I mean, so what is happening when your size is small? When your size is small, so let's say size is somewhere like 2 to the power 3, 2 to the power 4, 2 to the power 5, 2 to the power 6. These are like small size. I mean, compared to this whole x-axis. Now, when your size is small, your runs are going to be bigger actually, because if size is smaller, the runs are bigger. So that means you are going to have more and more temporal locality, right?
Yes, sir.
Because the temporal locality will come from this loop actually. Okay, so that means I only have, so if you look into a 2 to the power 3 problem, 2 to the power 3 problem is like 8 into 32 bytes. So that is like 256 byte. So everything is in L1 cache. The whole problem is in the L1 cache. So when you are doing a 2 to the power 3 problem, the complete data structure is in your L1 cache, because your L1 cache is in kilobytes. You are hardly using 256 bytes. If my calculation is correct, I'm doing it a little fast. If I make some mistake, you just let me know. So the logic is simple. You have a problem size of 2 to the power 3, so which is like 8, and you have 4 variables of 8 bytes each, so that is like 32 bytes, so total 256 bytes if you are doing a 2 to the power 3 problem. And then you are just doing it several times, and that is being determined by this runs, actually this runs variables. So absolute use of temporal locality again and again. So that would have given me the best result. That should have given me the best results actually, but it is not in fact. So it is starting from here and then gradually it is going up. Why is that happening?
Actually, initially it is not using the complete cache memory, but until it uses the complete cache memory, it will increase. Then it should saturate.
And also the number of runs goes down as we go from about 2 raised to 3 to 2 raised to 6.
No, runs does not go down actually. This is total is fixed. Runs into, say you look into this part clearly. Runs into size is equal to total. Runs into size is equal to total. Your total is fixed at 2 to the power 29. So every time these two loops always complete 2 to the power 29 iterations. This code actually all of you should look into it very deeply. It might look like a simple code, but this is not a simple code. I mean, there is a huge understanding which is hidden in this code. All of you should actually work it on pen and paper, what is really happening in the code. The first important point to be noticed is that these two loops together always do the same amount of computation. Because if this size goes down, the runs goes up. If runs goes down, size goes up, because total runs into size is total. Okay, now the point is simple. The point is, I mean, I should have ideally I should have started from this point actually, because as we go as the problem size increases, the temporal locality will gradually decrease actually.
So maybe first time it will have to bring whole data. So
That first time is happening for all problem size. That first time is not only for 2 to the power 3. That first time is happening for 2 to the power 6, 2 to the power 7, 9, everywhere. Now why it should just affect 2 to the power 3 problem size? You got it, right?
Sir, maybe because latency is high initially.
No, you are not understanding the problem once again. So these are all independent problems. So if you have to get this, you have to run it independently, this point, this data. Then these are all independent problems. So this is like a first problem. You just did it for 2 to the power 3. Suppose I don't have this outer loop. Suppose I don't remove this outer loop. Okay, so the first problem is 2 to the power 3. That's an independent problem. The second problem is 2 to the power 4. Similarly, 2 to the power 5 and so on. Now my question is simple. I mean, whatever logic you are giving, that holds true for each of these problems actually. 2 to the power 3, 2 to the power 4, 2 to the power 5. So why should I get some other trend for first 3 points and then some other trend for the rest of the problems?
Sir, the number of or the amount of data increases when we go from 2 to the power 3 to 2 to the power 5. So the data throughput, which is why the data throughput increases.
So the data throughput increases. No. Okay, I will give you a hint. This part has to be explained by pipeline. So that's good that we can utilize what we have learned today. This part has not to be explained by cache actually. So that's all of you are doing that mistake actually.
Hello, sir. Here I think that
N
n fixed and n is increasing.
Yes, because throughput is directly proportional to the n.
Exactly. So the first observation. So that's the first observation. Let me write it down. So the first observation which is coming is that at small n, which you have learned today, at small n.
Yes.
Yeah, at small n, the processor pipeline is too long to be efficient. At small n, let me write it down. Processor pipeline is too long, probably too long, is too long to be efficient. Okay, let me go to that plot also once again. So if you remember, yeah, this is the plot. I can see, you can see that this is the n. So you can go to this throughput of 1 only after a certain value of n. Otherwise, you are not going to get the best out of the pipeline. So the for first few points, actually, the pipeline is not giving you the kind of benefit you are expecting. All of you got this point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's go ahead and look into the second trend actually. Now, once the pipelines becomes efficient, so this is the point where probably the pipelines becomes efficient. This is the point where pipeline becomes efficient. Okay. Now, from here to here, I can see some kind of good performance, because if I have to compare this region, this particular region, so that is like in this region and this actually. Okay, so here so how much data is totally required for up to this point? Let me look into just this point. So this point is 2 to the power 13. So how much data is required? What will be the size of the total data structure for this point? 2 to the power 13, how much?
2 to the power 13 into 8 into 32.
Yeah, so 2 to the power 10, always remember 2 to the power 10 is 1k. So 2 to the power 13 is 8k. Yeah, 8k, and for each I need 32, right? Or if it is a single precision, then I need I have 4 variables A, B, C, D. So 4 variables. If it is single precision, then it is 64 bytes. Sorry, 30. How much? 16 for 4 variables. So 4 variables, I have 16 bytes. If it is 4 bytes each, so then 2 to the power 13, it will be 8k into 16. How much is that? 128 KB, right? I did it correctly, right? I hope
Yes,
I didn't make a mistake. Yeah, 128 KB, and less than that is 64 KB. The next point actually. So 2 to the power 12 will be 64 KB. Now let's look into the 2 to the power 12 actually. So this is 2 to the power 12 point actually. So I exactly don't remember the architecture actually, but it looks like probably this is where the downward trend started actually, probably this 2 to the power 12 or 13. So now we can say that this is the up to this point actually the L1 catch was supporting you. The moment you go beyond 64 KB, assuming that your L1 catch is of 64 KB, probably I exactly don't know the architecture on which this plot was run. Then the L1 is not going to support you anymore, because then you have to go out of L1 actually. So you will not be doing the spatial locality very nicely, and then probably you go to something like this point, which is like 2 to the power 14. It looks like. So 2 to the power 14 will be probably 256 KB, and I think L2 in this particular architecture was 256 KB. So you got some throughput there, and then it was saturated, and then again after the L2 gets saturated, you come to L3, and finally it comes to the memory. This part is clear to all of you how to interpret?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is very, very important. This can be interpreted only when it is supplied with your architecture information. So that is, if you give me all this information, I can easily interpret this plot. But the important point is the approach to interpret this plot. So the approach is basically I have to look in terms of the size of L1, the size of L2, and the size of L3, and every time I go beyond that memory level, there is a huge drop in performance. I mean, huge means it's really huge, because you can see here it's 5 and here it is. I mean, if you are within L1, L2, you are almost like 25. So it's like 5 times. Okay. So any questions today?
Sir,
Yes.
that in